Welcome back, subscribers. This video is going to be about beneficial ownership and BOI, and this has to do with something that came out January. You basically had to be compliant by like January the 1st of this year, I think 2025. We knew about it a couple of years before, and I made sure that my businesses were already aligned with these new rules that were coming into play. I'm going to do some screen shares so you can listen along if you want, and then go back to this if you need, or if you already know about it, or if you didn't know of this, of what's happening behind the scenes, of how they're going after ownership of assets, and like who they just want to basically know, like who really owns business entities. Okay, so we had to file this thing. It's on a federal level, and it's called I'll just do the screen share right now. It's called BOI, or beneficial ownership. I'm sure I don't have any screens open that will make me okay. Beneficial ownership filing. And in this, it's basically it just, if you've ever bought crypto before, you're required to use your driver's license with your picture, and you have to hold it up to your face. That identifies, you have to take a screenshot of your driver's license, and driver's licenses are now, you have to have like real identification, that you go in and you prove that you're who you say you are, that type of thing. So that's the precursor, where they have a real identification that can then be queued into corporations. Now, corporations didn't fall under this. You could open up a corporation in the past, and corporations would have a filing in the state, and you'd have somebody who would be the register. The register of the business could be anybody. You didn't have to be a lawyer. No, you still don't. You still have to be a lawyer. You could have your uncle do it. Whoever is the person, like basically handling the business side of this. And just want to make sure my microphone's still working. So the owner of the company is not the register of the company. So then they would list these owners of the companies. The register would then register through the documentation of the filing through the Secretary of State in the state, that you'd have to register who actually owns it. Now, people say like, well, of course you would put, if I own the company, I would of course put my name. If somebody else is registering and handling the documentation, I would put myself as the owner of the company. So I own a couple of companies. Of course, I'm going to put my name in as a company. But if you're using it for money laundering in the United States, up until like this change has happened, the United States has always been, and people didn't know this, basically it's a money laundering platform through the states and the banks, and the federal government, that there's just there's enough gray area that you could file things and not have any beneficial ownership to anything. So, example, you could file through the Secretary of State, and you could be the registrar. Let's say you own the company. It's a shell company. You've heard that term before. And the shell company could be owned by, you could name anyone you want. He-Man, Skeletor, George Jetson, whatever the hell you want. You could put in as the owner or the beneficiary of the company. And let's say you owned assets. Let's say you had a family member that passed on, and they left a vault full of gold that was buried in the backyard, right? And it's $100,000 or $1 million worth of gold bars. And if you take that into your personal possession, you'd have to pay taxation on it, because it's income on your personal person. But if you have a corporation, you could declare it inside of the corporation. And if it's initial startup capital, they'd never ask where it came from. They'd even be like, well, where the hell did you get this gold, He-Man? So you could then put it inside of that corporation. Now, you can still do this and still declare it as yourself, as taking this. It's called initial startup contribution. And the only time I've run into issues with this was with crypto, that they wanted to see where it actually came from, because on crypto they want to see it moving from fiat, like dollars, into crypto. But if it's like real entities, like it could be houses, it could be gold, silver, guns, and anything of a real asset that is transferable to another entity. Yeah, you could just like just put it into the company. Declare it on your operating inside your operating agreement, which is private. It doesn't go to the public level. The Secretary of State never sees it. Get it stamped by a notary, and then you go marching down to the coin, your coin person, and say like, oh yeah, I've got $100,000 worth of gold. And they're like, okay, sign here, da 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 da. And you have to fill out some documentation through the government, that you'd be selling. There used to be wide open where they didn't ask you anything, and then they started kind of clamping down on it. And once you reach a certain threshold, like say it's $10,000 or whatever it was, 10,000, that they would make you, fill out some documentation that shows that, this money is coming out of this entity, this asset's coming out of this entity. But yeah, you could absolutely just declare it. Now, if it's off the books and you don't go in and you don't sell it, then it's all private. Like nobody knows that you even really have it. But you could have it like behind the scenes. It's like, that's why it's called a shell company. People could open up a shell company. Let's say you own 10 7-Elevens, and the money that comes into the 7-Eleven goes into the shell company, and you don't file any taxes in it. And people say like, well, you have to file taxes. Be like, well, it's voluntary. There's no one out there that actually can force you to file taxes. I've known a number of people that have never filed taxes before. And if you've never filed taxes, the government can't come after you because they don't have a place the automated system doesn't have a way to go after you because they don't have an address and a name to associate with address and the taxes, because it's separated. As soon as you identify yourself and you declare yourself as a tax-paying citizen, then you're on the books, then they could go after you. So if you file taxes for just once and then you stopped, then yeah, you're going to have red flags. But if you never ever file, then you're not on the books. The IRS could never send you anything in the mail and be like, hey, we're noticing that you have an entity. They'd have no way to tune in and marry up the person to the assets, to the taxation, because they don't know what's going on, because you're not keeping track of anything, and there's no disclosure to the government, believe it or not. And I know this because let's say I have a friend who kind of walked me through it. But the friend has cleaned everything all up, and everything is all kosher. Everything is totally cool. So he exercised this because he couldn't believe that this was possible to do this, and actually went through, had a couple of lawyers that were monitoring it, and they too couldn't believe that it was possible because they'd never heard of anything like this. And yeah, like being able to move capital through a company into the bank accounts, out of the bank account, into spending it on whatever you want and never paying any taxes on it. No capital gains, no identification, nothing. It's risky because it's essentially tax evasion is what it is, but it's risky in that if anybody ever came after the company, you'd never be able to defend it because your He-Man Skeletor, whoever you have in is your beneficial owner of the company, is not a real person. So if you never marry up the assets to the person's name, there's no way to actually go after anybody. You can't prosecute somebody that's not a real person. It's really, really, really twisted. I'll do a separate video when I got a little bit more time to kind of go over this and how it worked in the old way. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it now just because you could still do it, but it's really stupid. Really, 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 really stupid. So yeah, if you came into a large sum of money, I've told people like, yeah, if you win the lottery, you could just, claim the lottery winnings and open up a corporation as startup capital in the company. So that it's like, they would never know that if you purchased the lottery ticket under the corporation and you had a winning ticket, you could then, before you claim it, you could claim it and say like, oh yeah, this company purchased the ticket and the company is going to be claiming the assets under its name. And then there'd be no startup capital. It's like a startup capital contribution. Okay. So, but that's like getting struck by lightning. That's not a high probability. So BOI, beneficial ownership. So they've changed the rules. So now they have to identify through the states, and there was a lot of state pushback. I know Texas was into it, like saying like, this is you can't force this on us. We can do whatever we want. And I was telling people like, no. Like this is part of this whole digital international plan that they're putting into place so that they can basically like it's to get the people, it's to get the dirty money out of the United States. It's to stop foreign adversaries from coming into the United States, illegal aliens, again, which is in the language, um, coming into the United States, declaring assets in the United States, shifting them over to the U.S., and then opening a bank account, because the banks have zero to do with the IRS. The IRS doesn't keep up with it. It's only whenever you file that the IRS could go back in, and if they audit you, then they could go back into your bank account. But if you had your personal bank account and you never ran the funds through your personal bank account, they can't come after you because you never took the income in. You've seen this probably a zillion times where there's somebody getting coming after him for tax evasion, and the guy's got like 3 boats in his in his driveway and a couple of Maseratis and a Lambo, and he's like, I don't own anything. That's what that means. He doesn't own, or she doesn't own anything, but the entity in which they brought the asset, that they purchased the assets in, they could purchase the assets in that company name. So say the company you have your 10 7-Elevens, and nobody has real beneficial ownership of the income to the 7-Elevens. You could run that company and bring in all the income into it, and then just spend it without having any tie to the IRS or anything, and then just spend it through an ATM card, or there's no signature behind it. You go to a bank, you get a bank check from a bank, and you send it directly to the car company, and it's a bank check. It doesn't even have your signature on it. That's how you get away from it. So you're never tied to it. Really twisted. But again, this is all set up by all of the politicians. It doesn't matter if it's a left or right. There's nobody to point the finger on like, oh, it's Nancy Pelosi. Be like, no, 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 no. That had zero to do with that crap. They all know about this, and they were probably already running all this behind the scenes. Hunter Biden is a great example. If you look at the Hunter Biden like tax evasion thing, it's exactly what he was doing. He's the bag man for his dad and all this other shit, and running it through Burisma and all that stuff. That's what this is. Okay, so that it's been, but people just don't understand really like what are the bones of it and how it worked. So again, I'll talk about that in another video, but that's what that is. Okay. So BOI it's an international identification of who is beneficial ownership, beneficial owner, the beneficiary of a legal entity that has an EIN number in the United States. So it's kind of like, okay, now you have all these corporations that are in all these states, and the states have been able to do whatever the hell they want. Now the federal government comes waltzing in and says like, okay, now you have all these companies being like, show me who actually really owns them. So if you've had people, and I know this from some they're vendors of mine that have had to get people compliant through Google, and they have family members that have set up their businesses unknowingly this way, or knowingly. We'll say they didn't know. That's better. And they can't get they can't sign up with some of these new entities. For example, through digital, because of Google and identification through Google. So if you go through Google, you have to have a Gmail account. You have to have the 2-party authentication and all that crap. That all tunes into this. So this particular family, the father set the company up. The sons, they own these like hotels and some Airbnbs, and they were from out of the country. I can't remember what country they're from, Pakistan or something like that. But they're like American citizens. The sons are American citizens. But the father set the company up, had the company and the assets inside of this corporation, the shell company, and they were trying to list the properties on like booking.com, I think is what it was. And these booking agencies are requiring you to be just Google compliant. Just be like, okay, well, we just need to have these specifications, this compliancy, and as long as you're compliant with Google, then it's fine with us, and you can do business with us, and we'll take your property and we'll list it on our digital site, and everything's fine. Not a big deal. You got nothing to hide. It's fine. You want to just do business. Well, they couldn't provide it. They didn't have the accounting because they didn't have any beneficial ownership of the company. So they have to unwind all that, and there's ways that you can do it, but again, it's a snag point. And as this starts to filter its way through, this is going to be a major effect on the housing industry and commercial in general, just all assets in general in the U.S., which again, just the housing industry of what housing assets in the United States are right now that are not on the books, that are in just private holdings, people just owning property or entities, He-Man, whoever. It's $75 trillion. It's about almost like it's like double the national debt. That's how big this money is. So out of that, I can't imagine like how much of that is foreign money that's using it as a tax haven, to funnel funds, bring in capital in the United States, buy property, open up a shell corporation that then, let's say you buy a hotel, an apartment building, something like that, that's in one of these shell companies, and then all the rent and revenue goes into the shell company, and it's like tax free. It's nuts. So those entities are going to be in trouble, and I think there's a lot of it. I think that the more people that I've talked to that I think it was more of like foreign investing into the United States, of them not necessarily knowing, but kind of hearing how to do it through foreign adversaries, or because they're not actually citizens of the United States, they kind of fall through the cracks. So say if you did live in Pakistan and you opened up a corporation in the United States, you don't need to actually have a real address. You could open up a post office box. You could have a mail forwarding system, and the IRS, they don't look at any of that stuff, because again, if they're not filing taxes, and for somebody from another company wouldn't necessarily be filing in the States, because they're not looking at it like they're in the States. They're outside of the country because they live in another country. They're just investing in the United States. You can still do this in other jurisdictions. If you're an American citizen, you can do this in other jurisdictions, and it's kind of a tax workaround for sure. But in the U.S., they're closing the loophole, if you will. I wouldn't call it a loophole. It's just like it's legal. It's legal in that they just never had any documentation to say you couldn't do it. Okay. So yeah, BOI. So if you go into the website, so here's the penalties. If it's a civil penalty, it's $692 a day if you report late, and criminal penalties up to $10,000 fines or imprisonment for 2 years. They're serious about this. Now, the ones that are enforcing this are FinCEN, enforced by Financial Crimes Network. So if you're in a foreign country, or you're using the banking system or whatever in the U.S., it's digital. Okay, and digital falls under FinCEN. And so if swapping money back and forth, whether you're wiring money, that the FinCEN is what looks at that. So there is, because what they say is that it's to stop like whatever, human trafficking, drugs, all the bad, nefarious stuff, that they're going after that. But there's a lot of people that are just like I said, running businesses, and they're not disclosing that they had businesses in the U.S. jurisdiction. And now the identification is saying like, okay, party's over, guys. Now you're going to have to declare these assets inside of the jurisdiction of the United States, and then you're going to have to pay income taxes on this money. Okay. And they before they didn't enforce it. And now by pushing BOI through, it basically sets a precedent, says like, okay, from this point forward, the party's over, and you need to clean up your shit. And this is going to have, I think this is going to be one of the major behind the scenes impacts of our financial system, because especially in the property market, okay, that people are going to be selling properties to get out from underneath this issue. Now, the problem is that it identifies itself only on the sale of the property. So if you don't have identification, and then they run this through, and then you go and try to sell the property, and then you take the money into your person. So say you're He-Man, and then you have this property. You got He-Man and Skeletor went in, they're buddies, and they decide to buy an apartment complex, and it's a $40 million apartment complex. And then Skeletor and He-Man, they're at odds, and they're like, we want to break up the relationship because we're not getting along. And they decide they're going to sell it. They know about BOI. They're like, oh, let's just go ahead and sell and get rid of it. They sell it, and then they take in the $40 million as income. They would then have to shift that 40 million. Where are they going to put it? If they put it back into their shell corporation, and then they try to put that 40 million back into the market, then it earmarks it and identifies it as being it's identified as income, because it's only whenever they try to take that 40 million and try to put it into a new property that you have to have identification to identify, like, where did the money come from? Like, where did you guys get this money? Okay. Because when everything starts moving to digital, this is going to take some time. This is going to be overnight. But as things go to this real world asset tokenization, you have to be compliant and identified. That's why they're doing all of this, to identify that whoever really owns it, that you can identify where the money actually came from. So that what the two of them could do is, okay, you take your 20 million, I'll take my 20 million, and I'm going to open up a new company and declare that as, startup capital. You could do that. Okay. It's not going to be like impossible to do that, but you're going to have to be smart about how you transfer the funds. You close one account that's dirty, and then you move it into a declared environment. You're not going to be able to run it undeclared anymore. That's basically the thing. So you come to the realization that it's being sewn up, that you're still going to be able to do this for a while, but at a certain point, there's going to be a no-go zone. Like you're going to get stuck, and you're not going to be able to move the money anymore. Or it's going to be, if it's in digital format, like through blockchain, you decide, oh, I'm going to buy a bunch of Bitcoin with it. They're going to be like, okay, where did you get the 20 million from? And that's, if it's to cash, it has more flexibility in the cash format than it does on the digital format right now. So as soon as you go into digital, that's a done deal. So people say, like, I'm just going to stay cash. That's fine, but in the future, there is an incentive for putting it into the digital system. Okay. And then there's also an incentive to have it inside of a corporation, because you have real, like, tax benefits and things like that. So they keep changing the rules as you go. And if you know that more of this is happening in the future, you'd be nuts to pretend like you're going to keep playing the old system until you can't do it anymore, because you're dealing yourself an inside straight from a card game perspective. If you don't know what it is, look it up. That it's all being identified and being put on a transparent ledger that everyone can see. That's why that's in the background. That's why you've got Trump talking about abolishing the IRS, because it's not going to be needed anymore, because as things go digital, they're just going to be able to see what everybody's got. So again, it's already being pumped into the lexicon of our reality, and that you better wake the hell up if you're in this type of situation, or if you're not, and you're in an environment where you walk around and you see, buildings that are uninhabited. You see, a lot of foreigners that are in your area. That this is big. I remember talking to somebody about, like, why is it that Indian guys all have, like, basically the same name? And because they're using the same name when they come into the States, because it's a laundering thing. It's a known thing in India. Like, when they come to the States, that they already know this game, and they're opening companies that are with, just like I said, they're like a He-Man. They just call themselves, they're all the same name. And there's no way to trace it back to that guy or girl. And so anyway, it's everywhere you look when you start looking at it from this perspective, that they're like, okay, Wild West is done, guys. We've allowed you guys to do this for, like, about a century. And now that we have all this money that's pumped into the U.S. marketplace and inside the jurisdiction of the United States, we're just going to cut all that shit off. And now you're going to have to be legit, And this all happened. This is, again, like, if you look at the history of Wild West, this is exactly what would happen every time they'd open up a new jurisdiction. There's lawlessness and gunfighting and everything else, and property ownership and things like that. It was very loose. And then once you get to a certain critical mass that's inside of that civilization, then it's required to legitimize everything and get everything on the books. So they're all about the accounting. Like whoever behind this is all about accounting. I have some. I've got a very strong running theory as to who's behind it, but it's a woo theory. So goes way back, like 6,000 years. Um, So enforce financial crimes through FinCEN, requiring for most foreign businesses unless exempt under CTA, businesses formed in 2024 must file within 90 days. So there's specific guidelines. So as soon as you file now, if you open up a corporation in the United States, this window will pop up on your Secretary of State that says like you have to file this right now, period. Now, my other companies, we had like all my other companies have already been compliant. So and what was funny is my accountant, they couldn't really wrap their head around it because they don't really know what it's for. They're like, why are they doing this? I don't know. So what's FinCEN? Financial Crimes Network. Okay, including those previously known as domestic reporting companies. This has to do with taxation. And their beneficial owners are now exempt from the requirement to report beneficial ownership in forming FinCEN existing foreign companies that must report their beneficial ownership in foreign. Okay, well, that's interesting. So, including those previously known as domestic reporting companies and beneficial owner are now exempt, and their beneficial ownerships are now exempt from the requirements to report existing foreign companies that must report their beneficial ownerships. Okay, so this is saying like if you're a true domestic, then it's not, the concern isn't there. But if you're a foreigner, like an alien, you have to identify yourself and go through the system because they know that you're not fucking paying taxes. But inside of this are domestics, people in the United States that were playing the old fuck game and not identifying themselves as being a beneficial owner. So, like I said, if Skeletor and He-Man, they live in the United States. Let's say they live in Palm Beach. All right. They've lived good lives. They've got really good places they live, but they've got a number of shell companies they have because they've got buddies that are lawyers and they're like, oh yeah, this is the game. Like you guys don't need to pay any taxes on this. And the rich are just going to keep getting richer, that type of thing. Well, that entity, because it has no beneficial owner, is considered because maybe if it doesn't have nexus. So what people would do in the States is nexus means that it has a real address. So part of this that's going to come into play that they're either not enforcing for domestics or it's kind of a gray area right now is that you'd want to get out of paying state income tax. So in North Carolina, our corporate income tax is 2.5%. It's like the lowest in the country, other than the states that are zero. So you get like Florida, Texas, I think Nevada, I think maybe Wyoming, Ohio, Delaware. So Delaware is a good one. Most people would open up LLCs in Delaware because when the money comes, you'll see lots of trucking, the trailers for trucking companies, that the trailers are licensed it'll have a Delaware plate on it. And that the reason is because the trucking company will take their income in and then it goes to Delaware and then they don't have to pay state income tax in Delaware. They just have to pay federal income tax. So that's a really good positioning for a company. If you don't have to pay any state tax, that's great. Whereas like, so say you're in New York State and you want to open up a shipping company, you'd be a lunatic to open it up, in New York State or California or something like that. And you'd be like, well, I'm just going to open up a company in Delaware. I'm going to use a mail forwarding system. I'm going to get a PO box. And then anytime somebody writes a check, sends me funds, it goes to the bank account, which is tied to the company and the physical address, which is some mail forwarding company in Delaware. And then I don't have to pay the state income tax and I get out from underneath it. So you're doing business outside of your state, and it's like some easy workaround to be able to mitigate the taxation in the state. So the companies are tax evading basically, and they want to get away from doing that they want you to have a physical nexus. They want you to have physical brick and mortar. Like I'm actually like have like store frontage type of thing. And then it comes to, that particular location in the state I'm actually doing doing business in. It doesn't mean that you can't go to other states, but it's like your primary business location. It's just like if you have your house, you own a house, and your primary residence is the one that all your mail comes to. It's the same principle. And then maybe you have like a couple of like maybe you have a vacation property, in another state, but your primary all your mail goes to the primary residence. Same principle, exactly the same principle. So anyway, this is what's happening behind the scenes. And then the next video that I'm going to talk about is something that we have found that has to do directly with ownership is going to be a big, big part of this, like creating and owning something, and then who has actual ownership of that material. And this is in like the digital space, influencers, anything that you're producing. Can you ensure that the company or the entity has legal ownership of that thing? And they're going to have a way, they already have a way to track this. So I'm going to explain how it works. But yeah, so that's BOI and kind of like the beginning portions of it. And I'll kind of get into it. And like if you can understand the past of what you could do with this and how powerful this was, you'd be like, oh my gosh, if I would have known about that, 5 or 10 years ago, I would be like probably really sweating bullets right now. But you would have made a lot more money because you weren't paying taxes, or you're running your company through Delaware like everybody else was. So you can already see like they close that off, and you having real true brick and mortar nexus in that new state or the state that you live in and reside in, and you're actually doing business in, that it changes the face of business, because you'd be required to pay the taxation of that state. Another thing to look at with this is how they're handling this on the digital side to catch everybody on requiring to pay taxes of where the business actually was done. So if I have a business, you'll see this, like if you order something, a window will pop up and it'll say shipping address and then billing address. And then there'll be a little box and you can click and be like, the shipping address is the billing address. Now, if I do it with my business, it's the same. So wherever it's being shipped to is the area that the sales tax needs to be appropriated to. And that's why you have those two windows that come in. So from a business perspective, they need to be following through and filing taxation in all these different jurisdictions. And excuse me, I don't know, maybe it was like 5 to 10 years ago, you used to be able to go on Amazon. It wasn't that long ago. I think it was like just pre-COVID that you could go on. It's like within 10 years that you could go online and buy an Amazon and there was no sales tax. Does anybody remember that shit? So be like, yeah. That's why everybody's like, oh my gosh, Amazon, there's no sales tax. Why would I buy it at my local mom and pop and have to pay state tax if I could just get it shipped to my house and sit on my ass for free through Amazon Prime and not pay any sales tax? Boom, done. So that also increased, Amazon's market share, because people were getting on, like, if I can save 2% or 5 or whatever it was, why would I pay it? So where I am in North Carolina, it's like 7.5% sales tax. But if I bought through Amazon, it'd be zero. Great. But what they're through this tracking system, again, if you can identify the primary address of the company, they can identify where the goods are supposed to be originated from. They go to the area of the shipping, which is who's supposed to be paying the taxation. And then the companies are responsible for paying the state tax based upon wherever it's being shipped to. So it gets very dicey. So you're talking about cross-border taxation, which a lot of companies, it's like, why would you? I mean, you do an international business. We talked about it with what we're doing here, and it's behind a paywall, because the stuff like we're talking about right now, like it's proprietary knowledge. Like people, again, are talking about this because they're not necessarily seeing it. And then we want to make sure that we have proper ownership of our material that we put out, and it's cheap. It's really cheap to be in it, and you guys get to comment and be free to be able to say whatever you want to say, and not have some oversight committee or whatever else coming in and jacking around with free speech and whatever else you want. Be like, yeah, hey, rock on, say whatever you want to say, it's fine. And that's huge. So like this particular like community environment, we're we're following the guidelines of the internet and the digitation and this ownership type of thing, that we're owning the platform so that we can enable those rights and things to the people and be able to continue free speech and things like that, because it's really important, because ideas are very dangerous, but they're also very powerful. Um, so yeah, that's another way to kind of look at it. So yeah, so if you're shipping from one place to another and you're a company and you're like, oh my gosh, now with the internet, I can ship to all over the whole US, the lower 48. Well, you're supposed to be keeping track of the sales tax and then doing sales taxation to each one of those states. So if you don't have that accounting ability, um, you're going to need to have it if you're going to continue that type of business, or if you're thinking about that in the future for business, you're going to have that that cost for your accountant, or you can already do this through like QuickBooks and the invoicing, things like that it will keep track of it, but you're still going to have to file through each one. It's a huge pain in the ass. You're going to have to file state to state that if you're basically the go-between, uh, uh, you're the you're the holding pen for the taxation. You to bring in whatever, $1 million a year, 100,000, whatever it is. And I brought that money in through 30 different states. And all you are is you're the entity that is the pass through. And you're saying like, okay, I get it. I'm doing business in your state. I'm going to take in the 2.5% from North Carolina. I live in Idaho because I sell whatever, I don't know, horse saddles or something. I don't know what they make it. Oh, potatoes. So I sell potatoes. I'm selling them direct to North Carolina. It's non-tax exempt, so I have to charge them the 2.5% down in North Carolina, whatever their state tax is, and whatever the jurisdiction they're in, and the county that they're in, and wherever they're being shipped to. And then that goes to Idaho, and Idaho is like, okay, well, I got whatever the company is in Idaho. Then they have to send the taxation back to North Carolina. So, because they're doing the bidding of the states and the counties. So nobody's really enforcing it, but it's coming because the system is already setting up for this compliancy. We know everything you're doing bullshit. And it's going to clip a lot of people, and they're going to be having to pay for back taxation and things like that. So it's something to look out for, and we'll talk more about it, because this is going to definitely change the economics of the United States. Like whenever this stuff starts becoming slowly enforced, and that's what I'm going to get into in the next video, and where some of these things have already been identified in the music industry, about whatever it was, like 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, and some stuff that came through like ownership and how you pay royalties back. So think of like the states owning, if there's materials and things that are being shipped out of your state, the state views that as their ownership because your company is inside of that state. And if you sell it to another state, they're like, well, we want a cut of that pie. So you need to pay us back. The taxation has to go back to the state of origin of who's ever the sales taxation. Like it's the cost of doing business with the states. So anyway, more to come. Cheers.